Aside from being the dumb and ditzy blonde on Three's Company, another thing Suzanne Somers will be fondly remembered for is being the sex-crazed older lady who was having sex 3 times a day, 7 times a week, deep into her 70s. In fact, she has been sex-crazed since she was little, to the point that she was kicked out of Catholic school when she was 14 and got pregnant as a teenager. However, what most people may not know is that her crazy sex life may not have totally been her choice. It may have been due to some gruesome stuff she went through at the hands of her father during her childhood. And in this video, we'll be sharing all the details, including how her crazy sex life ruined 2 popular marriages back to back. Suzanne Somers was married to her second husband for almost 50 years, but that doesn't mean she had a dry sex life in all that time. Not at all. You'd be flabbergasted to hear about all the kinky things she loved to get up to, even in her 70s. In 2021, just 2 years before her passing at age 76, Suzanne unashamedly revealed that she and her husband still had vigorous sex, sometimes up to 3 times a day, and often first thing in the morning before the sun was even up. How is that even possible at that age, you may wonder? Well, thanks to a cocktail of hormones and supplements, even her husband admitted that their sex life was better than that of teenagers. I am all hormoned up, supplemented up. Sex is better than when I was a teenager. In one podcast, Suzanne also spoke candidly about their sex life at her age, saying, "At this stage of life, most people think that's over the hill. What time is it, noon? I had sex with him 3 times so far today." If she had such a wild sex life in her 70s, can you imagine what it was like in her younger years? And it wasn't just her personal life that was filled with crazy sex stories. What about her time on Three's Company? There's just as much jaw-dropping behind-the-scenes craziness that will blow your mind. Suzanne Somers' sexual passions developed at a shockingly young age, but to understand her wild and crazy sex life, we first have to take a look at her wreck of a childhood to see how and why she became the highly sexual person that she was. Born in 1946 and the second youngest of 4 children, Suzanne Marie Mahoney was raised in utter poverty in a dysfunctional family. Her father was a mischievous Irishman and worked in a brewery, which was probably not a great combination. By the time Suzanne was 6 years old, his drinking had gotten out of hand, and he turned violent. No one was spared when he flew into his drunken outbursts, not even Suzanne and her siblings. He was so out of control, and he was in such a state of rage at this point that terrible things happened. As a result, young Suzanne was plagued by nightmares and was a bedwetter until the age of 12. It was humiliating, and my father made fun of me for it. I was told over and over that I was stupid and hopeless and worthless and nothing. The constant berating and belittling from her father, who constantly reassured her that she was a loser and would never amount to anything, had a surprising effect on young Suzanne. Instead of crumbling into a million broken pieces, she used it as fuel to fire her dreams. Suzanne was determined to become rich and famous just to prove him wrong. By the time she was 14, her mother had finally saved up enough money to send Suzanne away to an elite all-girls Catholic school run by nuns. Even though her mother couldn't really afford it, sending her away was the only way to save Suzanne from her abusive father. Embarrassed by her impoverished upbringing, Suzanne made up all sorts of lies just to fit in with her wealthy peers. But while Catholic school was meant to be a saving grace for Suzanne, it was actually there that her sexual desires overcame her. Despite all the lies and fantasies that she told her fellow students of how she also came from a wealthy family, Suzanne still struggled to make friends. She spent most of her time on her own and escaped into world of fantasies. Some of those fantasies included the opposite sex. Unable to act out her desires, she started writing it down, until her imaginary erotic love letters were discovered by the nuns, who branded it as too explicit for a decent Catholic girl. I got called into the principal's office, and when I walked in, my mother was sitting there and she was crying. The nun just read me up and down, then started reading the notes out loud in a mocking tone. It was so humiliating and so embarrassing. Before the end of her sophomore year, she was expelled and sent to a normal high school. Now blossoming into a young girl, the boys at her new school couldn't keep their eyes off of her. By age 16, she started dating a college jock, a star baseball player named Bruce Summers. At the same time, she also discovered another love, acting. Suzanne participated in school plays and everyone fell in love with her. Even her drama teacher, a man who was already in his 40s. He took a particularly inappropriate liking to the teenage Suzanne and made no secret of it. During one school play, Suzanne was walking up the stairs and onto the stage. Walking behind her was her drama teacher, who in no uncertain terms complimented her on her great behind. Even though Suzanne knew it was incredibly inappropriate, she loved the sexual attention. Life at school was a welcome escape from the turmoil at home, where her father's drinking and violence was still ripping the family apart. The first time Suzanne ever stood up to her drunken father was when she was 17, and he had torn off her prom dress and once again shouted at her that she was nothing. In defense, she smacked him with a tennis racket. After graduating high school, Suzanne's talents landed her a music scholarship at Lone Mountain College. She was finally free of her controlling father and finally had the freedom she always dreamed of. Or so she thought. Because in an instant, all her dreams came crashing down. Within her first year in college, her rambunctious high school days came back to haunt her. Suzanne discovered that she was pregnant. Her father went crazy and called her all sorts of horrible names. "I always knew you'd get knocked up," he told her. Forced to drop out of college, she married the father of her baby, Bruce Somers, just a few days after learning the news. Suzanne was barely 19. The last thing she ever wanted to do was to get married, but she had no choice. It was what society expected. "My wedding day was one of the worst days of my life," she said. "I was dying inside. If I didn't get out of this, I would die." After less than a year of marriage, Suzanne started looking for love outside of her union. She found it with her drama teacher, who was more than twice her age. The steamy love affair led to her divorce, and for the first time in her life, she had a real shot at freedom. With no child support from Bruce, Suzanne had to rely on odd jobs and her sex bomb looks to find modeling work. Finally, in 1968, at the age of 22, her stunning looks secured her a television appearance as a prize model on the Anniversary Game. But while she was hired purely as eye candy, her acting skills were deemed so terrible that she was fired almost straight away. However, her sexy curves did catch the attention of the show's host, then 34-year-old Alan Hamal. He was immediately obsessed with her, and in his own words, lusted over her. Sparks flew right away, and the two began a highly sexual affair. It wasn't until after several nights of passion that Suzanne discovered, much to her horror, that Alan was married with 2 children. But despite her initial shock, she could not walk away from the love triangle. It wasn't long before Suzanne was met with another, even bigger shock. She was pregnant with Alan's baby, with Alan still a married man with his own children, and with the 24-year-old Suzanne unable to afford raising a second child, she opted for abortion. I didn't feel good about this, but at the same time, to have another child, I couldn't even feed the one I had. I had no choice. But during those years, it was against the law. However, Alan managed to find a doctor willing to take the risk, but neither Suzanne nor Alan could imagine just how big that risk would be. Alan dropped her off for her appointment and left her there on her own, while he flew off to attend a business meeting in another city, not knowing that Suzanne would almost lose her life there. She suffered severe complications during the procedure and was lucky to live to tell the tale. Not long after, Alan left his wife for Suzanne, and she and her son moved in with him. By 1973, her blonde sex bomb looks landed her first credited movie scene in American Graffiti. However, much to her disappointment, she was cast once again purely as eye candy and had no speaking role in the film. She appeared for just a few seconds as the hot blonde in The White Thunderbird, but even though she didn't speak a single audible word, all of Hollywood went crazy and wanted to know her name. Among those fans eager to discover the identity of the mysterious blonde was Johnny Carson. After finally meeting her, Carson invited Suzanne onto his show. Her appearance on The Tonight Show swung the doors wide open for her to appear on other similar talk shows and game shows. As her popularity rose, more and more network producers took notice of her. Her big breakthrough came in 1977 when she was invited to read for Three's Company. It took just one audition, and her life was changed forever. Her role as Chrissy Snow made her an international sex symbol and overnight sensation. Her stunning figure was plastered all over magazine covers. Suzanne also didn't shy away from letting her clothes fly for some full-frontal hot and steamy nude photo shoots for adult magazines. That same year, after almost 10 years together, Suzanne and Alan finally tied the knot. From the outside looking in, one would imagine that she finally had the perfect life she always dreamed of. But no, Suzanne was still not happy. Because of her nightmare childhood and her abusive father, she was still obsessed with wanting more fame. So, she hired a hotshot manager, Jay Bernstein, to push her image even further. Bernstein was famous for helping stars like Sammy Davis Jr. and Michael Landon achieve the heights of their fame, but he was also responsible for turning Farrah Fawcett into a global sex symbol. Meanwhile, things on the set of Three's Company were also slowly coming apart. It was one of the top-rated sitcoms of the time, but behind the scenes, the show was tainted by sex scandals and infighting. Joyce DeWitt, who played Janet Wood, was constantly at odds with producers over her paycheck or her wardrobe or even her character's lines, and she pretty much got whatever she demanded. John Ritter, on the other hand, as Joyce once revealed, was having sex left and right with many of the female guest stars on the show. It's worth noting that John was married at the time to actress Nancy Morgan, but it's probably no surprise there. The show absolutely pushed the boundaries of the times when it came to scantily clad women showing as much butt and cleavage as they could, and jamming in as many sexual jokes and innuendos as humanly possible. No wonder it was called Jiggle TV. So yes, John was constantly surrounded by fresh, hot new actresses with each episode. Sadly for Suzanne, her never-ending hunger for more fame, along with all the behind-the-scenes turmoil on set, would almost end her career. By the end of Season 4, when it came time to renegotiate her contract for Season 5, Suzanne demanded the same pay as her male counterparts, who were getting paid 5 times more. While Suzanne and Joyce got $30,000, John Ritter waltzed away with $150,000. But what Suzanne didn't know was that Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams from Laverne and Shirley had just pulled a similar stunt and got away with it, but the network wasn't happy. So when Suzanne came along and also demanded more money, the network decided to make an example of her to deter any other female talent from doing the same. The night before we went in to renegotiate, I got a call from a friend who had connections high up at ABC, and he said, "They're going to hang a nun in the marketplace, and the nun is Suzanne." And that's just what they did. They fired her and made a big commotion out of it as a stark warning to all other women in the industry, basically saying, "We'll rather fire you before we give you more money." But it didn't take Suzanne long to bounce back. Possibly being fired from Three's Company was the best thing to happen to her. She soon became the face of the legendary Thigh Master. She continued her acting career in film and television and eventually starred in another hit TV sitcom, Step by Step. She even hosted 2 of her own talk shows. When Suzanne passed away in 2023 from breast cancer, her estimated net worth was a staggering $100 million. Not bad for a girl who grew up in poverty with an abusive father who constantly yelled profanities at her and told her she would always be a big fat nothing. Did you know about the personal struggles of Suzanne Somers or about her crazy sex life? If you enjoyed this video, there's a good chance you'll also enjoy the one showing on your screen right now. Click, enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you on the next one.